Here's a segment from a recent Gun Talk radio episode. You can listen to all the Gun Talk radio podcasts however you tune in, or check out guntalk.com for more. Well, one of the guys who's been doing training for an awful long time, combat veteran of Desert Shield, Desert Storm, 5 years of active duty, 4 years of reserve duty in the U.S. Marine Corps, marksmanship instructor, SWAT team, special operations response team. It just goes on and on. Grand Master in competitive shooting, Mike Seeklander, joins us right now. Mike, thank you so much for spending some of your time with us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me back on the show, Tom.
You bet. Oh, yeah, I also should mention 15 years experience in martial arts, holding a lot of ranks, including black belt in Okinawan freestyle karate. So you combine the whole combatives with firearms, with weapons, and also not using weapons, right?
You know, absolutely, Tom. I didn't. When you talk about it, I'm like, man, how did I get all that stuff done? But the bottom line was I had a lot of hobbies, certain key hobbies. You know, I enjoyed the fighting aspect of it. You know, when I got into shooting, it was from a self-defense aspect as well as, you know, I just got hired in law enforcement. So I wanted to be as good as I possibly can. And, you know, competitive shooters are the best out there at shooting guns really fast and getting hits. So the entire time I've been shooting, I've been training jiu-jitsu and, you know, bare-knuckle karate and some other crazy stuff, too, when I was younger. So,
well, you know, and you're in an interesting position because you're in both worlds, because you understand that a lot of people who are shooters are not necessarily gun fighters, and some of the things that they are taught or they work on are really good at getting higher scores in competition, which you're good at, but they don't necessarily cross over completely to gunfighting. Is that fair?
No, it is, and you are totally correct. And here's the interesting thing. It's the exact same on the opposite end as well. For example, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and roll around and do some MMA striking, fighting, and whatever else. And oftentimes those fighters, highly skilled, you know, guys and gals that can fight like crazy are not often carrying guns, and they're not practicing with the guns. And they're not the shooters as well. So I'm always trying to tie the shooters up with the fighters and the fighters up with the shooters and say, hey, we're all into defending, so let's not be a one-trick pony. Let's learn a little bit of everything.
One of the things that it's always been frustrating to me, and at the same time rewarding, which is interesting, and I know you've had the same experience, maybe less so because people actually listen to you, but in my case, I keep telling people, you need to go get training, you know, your concealed carry class really wasn't much in the way of training, and people go, yeah, and then they finally go to a SIG Academy, a gun site, you know, Thunder Ranch or someplace. They go somewhere and they train with somebody good, and they come out and they go, holy cow, Tom, I didn't know anything, and I didn't even know that I didn't know anything. I mean, that's got to be pretty common for you.
It's extremely common. I mean, I have people come to class on a regular basis and leave and say, I cannot believe what I didn't know. But, you know, we've said that saying forever. You don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And the bottom line is, I think, like you were saying earlier, I think a lot of times when people hear me try to sell, hey, take a class, please take a class, whether it's my class or Tom's classes or anybody else's that's a competent instructor's class, please take a class, because if not, what you're going to do is you're going to spend your ammo, which is very hard to find and very expensive now, and your training time, and you're going to build bad habits. And when you come to class a year from now, I'm going to spend the entire class trying to fix all of the habits that you built that were not proper. And it's amazing that people just don't see it that way. Anything that I've ever done that I didn't know, I took a class on. Even shooting. I mean, I took classes from every one of the best shooters out there when I was learning to compete, you know, and I'd already been carrying for 5 or 10 years. So I thought I knew how to shoot, but I didn't, you know.
Give me an example of bad habits.
Oh, bad habits. You know, improper access to the firearm. You know, the simplest things, Tom, like how to properly grip a handgun. We're talking for years, people have watched it on TV and they've kind of figured it out. I would guess probably 90% of my students are improperly or under gripping their handguns. They have no idea where to put their hands or how much pressure to put on the gun or where to put the pressure. And if you don't understand that, it's like trying to drive a car without grabbing the steering wheel properly. You're never going to be able to shoot a handgun as effective. Same thing with a rifle. Improper, you know, trigger control, understanding what works and what doesn't work, and how we can reset the trigger as fast as possible. And most importantly, how do we actually fire the gun without moving it? A lot of people blame a lot of bad habits with, well, he jerked the trigger, or he didn't aim the handgun, or she didn't see the front sight. In reality, it's learning how to properly grip and hold the handgun and then pull the trigger without moving it. If we do those two things, generally speaking, if the gun's sighted in, we're going to get a hit.
Interesting. One of the things that, and you've been doing this a long time, and I've been talking about it a long time, and I'm not a firearms instructor. I'm a student. I just go to schools, and I go work with people like you and kind of go, damn, I still don't know anything. But one of the things about this is that there are more instructors out there. There are more schools out there. And one of my concerns, and I don't even know if it's a well-founded concern, frankly, is, how good are these instructors who are popping up? I mean, I've seen some of the ones teaching concealed carry classes, and I will be honest, some of them just scare the bejesus out of me, because I've been around them. I've actually had more guns pointed at me by concealed carry instructors and those guys and open carry guys than anybody else. So how good are these guys, or how does somebody know if they're going to a good instructor?
Oh, that's a great question, Tom. I would tell you that just like with technique, an individual may not know what they don't know in terms of how to shoot a gun or whatever else. The problem is the same thing, it goes true for instructors as well. Because they don't know what they don't know, it's going to be very hard for them to potentially pick a good instructor. But I think there's some things you could look at that would stand out. Number one, what are their credentials? What have they done? If they're teaching some sort of deep concealment, covert carry class, and they've never really done that in law enforcement or the military or as a civilian defender in some way, shape, or form, well, then maybe they're not that skilled in that particular area. Can they shoot a gun? I mean, more often than not, if you find an instructor and they have a website and you're thinking about going to their class, you could probably Google their name. Everybody is on the internet somewhere. There's probably a video of them shooting a handgun. Can they shoot a handgun? And that's simply a matter of watching it. And then can they relay it effectively? Another thing really good instructors do is they tend to have some sort of videos out there or social media channels or whatever else, or you could talk to their students, because I've been with you, I'm sure you have too. I've been around individuals that were fantastic at shooting a gun. They knew all the ins and outs and they can actually do it, but they couldn't explain it to a student, and they certainly couldn't mentor and coach a student, which is what a good instructor does. They don't just relay information. They mentor and coach and mold that student so they can actually do what they're trying to get them to do, and that's super important.
Well, teaching is a different skill from shooting, and you could be a really good shooter, and you just can't teach it. You can't explain it. It's like, you hear people say, well, I don't really know why I do it that way. I just know that it works. Well, that's not good enough. You got to know why it works for you and then be able to relay that and help somebody else figure it out and get to that point.
It's funny you say that, because in my initial introduction to my students, I always tell them a little bit about my background and, this and that. And then I always tell them when we start the drills, I'm going to give you the why behind everything that I do. And if I don't give you the why, come up there and slap me on the side of the head, because I'm not doing my job. Because my goal with my students is to not necessarily tell them to do something, but to sell them on the concept of what I'm trying to teach them. Because if they have the buy-in, if they buy into what I say because, they believe it, they see it, they believe it, and they believe that technique is valuable, then they're going to try to do it. Or if I just say, do this because I said so, because I'm Mike Seeklander and I was a federal instructor, whatever else, that doesn't work with people. They don't learn like that. Adults don't learn like that,
No, there's got to be a buy-in there. Hey, Mike, hold on a second. I need to take a quick break here. We're talking with Mike Seeklander. Mike, let me ask you, first of all, what is the American Warrior Society?
Oh, the American Warrior Society is pretty much everything defensive. So it's like the encyclopedia of defensive content. We actually call our login area the membership vault, and basically we have up to 44 different programs now, several hundred videos, and it's broken down into, for example, training program, defensive handgun, training program, low light, training program, defensive rifle. There's a medical section. There's a home tactics section. There's a vehicle tactics section that discusses all the complications of employing a firearm in a vehicle, which is a super complex environment, but it is our online encyclopedia of defensive-related content.
And that's at AmericanWarriorSociety.com. I like the fact that you mentioned it's complicated. We hear people say that, oh, it's complicated. And I try to get to people and say, and they think, well, I'm at the range. I draw my pistol out. I shoot the cardboard target. How complicated is it? So, let me just do a little bit of force on force with you. And you start to understand everything about defensive use of a firearm, and even whether to do it or not is complicated, isn't it?
It's extremely complicated. It's funny you say that because I had that thought just the other day. I was actually in a restaurant and remembering some of the filming that I did. As you know, I was one of the co-hosts of The Best Defense years ago. And we did multiple scenarios. We did vehicle scenarios. We did scenarios in restaurants or whatever else. And every environment the average civilian defender is in is a very complex place to draw a gun and play. I was sitting in the restaurant the other day. I'm thinking, what if a guy did walk in that door right there and pull out a gun? But there are multiple layers of tables between me and the door. And each of these tables had between 4 and 5 people, all of which are going to do something different when a guy walks in the front door with a gun. So it's not simply a matter of, like you said, standing on the range, drawing a handgun, and shooting a cardboard target. I mean, just think about it. Everybody listening right now probably drives. Yeah, they probably drive, and they're armed when they drive. And just imagine a passenger, your wife or your girlfriend, or maybe your husband sitting, to the right of you, and a threat appears out their window. Now, assuming they're unarmed, which may be the case, may not be the case, what do? I mean, you've got a gun on, you're in a vehicle. How do you manage the passenger? How do you manage the gun? How do you not shoot the passenger? How do you effectively utilize your firearm? And man, I actually did a video for AWS not long ago on that, and it's an extremely complex environment in trying to figure out how not to shoot the people you love and to potentially shoot the people you don't love that are attacking your family,
And then when you start thinking about it in those kind of terms, and I always encourage people to sit there in their big easy chair and think about those kind of scenarios in depth, then you start to think, okay, it would really have been helpful had I had an in-depth conversation with my loved one ahead of time of, if this thing happens, we're going to do this, or if I say this to you, I need an immediate, unquestioning reaction because I've seen something, I need you to go this way, kind of thing.
That's exactly right. We have a specific code word in my family, a code phrase, and if I say it, they have a couple key things they're going to look at in terms of my body language and what I'm doing, but they all know exactly what to do. And we talk about it. It's not something we talk about daily, but I mentioned, hey, if I say this, kids, I'll be sitting in the restaurant, what would you do right now? And I'll test them. Well, I would go over here and I would do this. And then we'll kind of game plan it or game start. But you're right, Tom. You have got to have the conversation ahead of time.
How does somebody, when they go to a class, they said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go train with Mike Seeklander. I'm going to go to the SIG Academy. I'm going to go to Thunder Ranch or Gunsight or someplace. How do you get the most out of a class?
So, well, first of all, before I talk about the class, I would tell the listener, your listeners right now, that if they choose to take a class, that's step number one, meaning they've already overcome maybe their beliefs that, well, I've owned guns for 20 years. Why would I need to take a class? They've already humbled themselves, and I would pat them on the back. That's a first big step. But when you're in class, I'll give you an analogy of an example of a student I had recently. This guy, when he came to a private lesson first, and then came to one of my classes later on. He was the one in the front row the entire time with a notebook. And he wasn't just accepting the information like, I'm going to listen to it, I'm going to try to get as much out of it as I can, then I'm going to go do the drills. No, every single thing I taught, he wrote down. He tried to listen to every single detail. He asked more questions than anybody in the group. And by the way, he was already one of the best shooters in the group. So hint, if he's already one of the best shooters and he's the one asking the most questions, what does that tell you? I mean, how do you think he got to be one of the best shooters in the group? Exactly. Bingo. But he was so immersed in it. He understood right away, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And I know we've heard some boneheaded questions, but the bottom line is, if you're thinking it, ask it. Because if you're there, I tell my students, I'm like a sponge. You paid me to be you're a sponge. So you're going to wring everything out of me you possibly can. Get every single drop out, and we'll stay as long as we need to answer your questions. And that's super important.
Well, and then, the other side, you've had the person who shows up in class and he says, yeah, but, at this other school, they taught me this. Or even worse is the guy who wants to show you that he's actually a really good shooter and the way he does it, and he's just not open to what you're talking about.
I've had them all. I've had every single one of them. And 99.9% of my students, I've found a way to communicate to them and win them over. There have been a couple in the end where they said, well, I was taught this by this instructor, and I like this better. And what we do is, after we explore a technique and they truly understand it and they have all the information necessary, I let them choose, Tom, because here's the bottom line. Their fight, if they have to defend themselves or their family in the Walmart parking lot, is their fight. It's not my fight. So if I've educated them on the information, the technique, as good as I possibly can, in the end they say, well, this is going to work a little better for me because of my circumstances, that's fine. That's okay. We solved the problem. We got across the information that made their technique as good as it possibly can, and that's their choice. That's every gun owner's choice, you know?
You've heard the same thing said that everybody has. You guys are just paranoid. But the difference is you have been there, done that, both in the military, doing private protection, doing law enforcement, doing rescue work. You know what the bad guys are really like. If you would, take a minute and just talk to the person who's thinking, I don't know that I really need to do this. You guys are just kind of over the top with this stuff.
It's funny you say that, because it's like, who owns a fire extinguisher? Who puts on a seatbelt? But when was the last time you had a home fire? Well, you own a fire extinguisher because of the potential of a home fire. And you don't have to go any farther than the news, as long as you can get away from the politics right now, to see all of the bad things that are going on. And it's not getting any better. In the last year, we've seen more chaos, in my experience, than the last 10 years. You just got to believe it. Google, we actually have a page on the American War Study. It's called CA, Criminal Intelligence Analysis. It's not the CIA like you do. But anyways, the point is, it searches for criminal activity. It searches for crimes in certain areas, and you can read all of the different articles. And we added that so people could read the articles and start to see trends in their area and customize it. And then also learn from them. Like, okay, if this happened to me, what would I have done different? How do I game plan this? What would happen if my family was in this situation? There's a lot to learn from game storing those things.
Oh, there is. I've got basically Google Alerts set up where they look for stories about, carjacking, self-defense, knife attacks. I've got, anytime there's a news story on any of those, I'm getting an alert and I'm being able to read the story. So it's basically what you're doing over there, same kind of deal. And it's just that eye-opener of, this is real. This happens not all the time. It happens every single day. And to deny that is to put your head in the sand. If people want to know more about what you're doing, Mike, what's the best way for them to find you?
Oh, man, they can find links to everything on my primary website. If they remember my name, MikeSeeklander.com, that will redirect you to my primary training page. Of course, they can type in AmericanWarriorSociety.com as well. Okay,
and it's Mike Seeklander, Seeklander, simple as that. I really appreciate your time. I look forward to a time when we can actually go do a little shooting and some video together.
I am all in, Tom. You let me know when and where, and I am there, I promise.
Perfect. There you go.